Hello everyone, it's me again. Today I will recap the movie Moonfall. Due to some force, the moon has left its orbit that has been moving for millions of years. They also discovered that the moon is a giant machine disguised by a layer of rock and soil. Who knows how terrible the moon falling will be, whether humans can prevent this disaster from happening or not. Please join to watch today's recap. The movie begins in 2011. Brian and his colleagues are maintaining a satellite in space. Fowler inside controls the ship. While repairing, the ship's lights suddenly flash violently. Brian also feels that there is some danger here. He just turned around when a strange object crashed straight into them. There is no chance of repairing this satellite anymore. Marcus was also pushed by the force that made him stray into space. Brian tried to reach out to save his teammates, but his strength was limited, and Brian himself was pulled back to the ship, which was shaking violently. The dark matter seemed to have thoughts, and they gathered together like a swarm of bees and flew away. At this moment, Brian opened the cockpit door and crawled inside. Fowler had long since fainted due to the strong impact. Without the main pilot, Brian had to save the team alone. He sat in the cockpit and tried to stabilize the ship. After many attempts, the ship finally returned to orbit. But Brian could no longer see Marcus. Unable to lose any more teammates, Brian decided to bring Fowler back to Earth safely. At this time, on the surface of the moon, black dust kept flying up as if they were drilling into the moon. This signaled that Earth was about to face hell on Earth. After returning to Earth, Brian had to go to court to testify about the satellite explosion accident. Although he tried to explain that it was due to strange objects attacking, NASA did not believe it. They thought that he was the one who caused the meteorite impact. From then on, Brian lost his happy little family, and he also lost his career. 10 years after the spacecraft explosion, Fowler was promoted to deputy director of NASA. Her subordinates reported that the moon had moved out of its orbit. They also discovered a gas crater at the site of the accident. On this side, Brian became unemployed. He had to live in a rented house, and he could not even pay the monthly rent. Elsewhere, Casey was a self-proclaimed scientist. His situation was difficult when he had to work 2 jobs to make a living. He researched that the moon had moved out of its orbit before NASA. But when he tried to contact NASA, he was looked down upon by others. Later, Casey picked up a newspaper about the spaceship accident years ago, and immediately drove to find Brian to tell him everything. But Casey was chased away by his idol, who also thought that Casey was a crazy person or some kind of idiot. Casey tried to throw the documents back, hoping that Brian would read it. That night, after returning home, Brian saw his son Sonny racing illegally, having just been handled by the traffic police. Facing the fact that Sonny would have to go to jail, Brian went to court but had no money, so he could not bail out his son. Brian immediately called the boy's stepfather, Tom, who is the director of a wealthy luxury car company, hoping that Tom could save the boy. Meanwhile, at NASA, they saw that the situation was getting more and more serious. The moon was getting closer to Earth. When it got close enough, the debris on the moon would fall, destroying all life. If this continued, a disaster would happen in 3 weeks. They also discovered a crater on the moon. The director said this was confidential information and forbade employees from revealing it. But as soon as he said it, he was shocked when this went viral on social media. NASA leaders had to go out to calm the people. On TV, reporters and geographers put forward many hypotheses. If this was true, the tide would rise very high. People would need to move to higher ground to survive. NASA sent a probe to the moon. This further sparked riots everywhere. Looting became a pastime in big cities. The whole world was in fear and anxiety. At this point, the police didn't care about these things anymore, because anyway, when the disaster came, everyone would die. Brian remembered the fat guy Casey from the day before, so he went into the trash can to find the documents he left behind. Immediately, Brian followed the address to meet Casey, asked why he could know everything in advance. Casey confirmed that the moon was a giant superstructure with many operating machines inside. Now that gasoline was scarce, it ran out of energy and was about to fall. On this side, NASA had launched a probe to the strange crater. They dropped a probe down to check the depth of the crater. But when it reached a depth of 25 kilometers, the device stopped, and suddenly it was pushed back up at super speed. At this time, from below the black hole emerged an unidentified strange object. Very quickly, this thing surrounded the spacecraft. This entity was like a giant octopus and crashed straight into the hull of the spacecraft. The frightened crew immediately put on their helmets. The entity thrust its tentacles inside. Very quickly, it killed all the people on the spaceship. The ground center was extremely scared when seeing this scene. All the crew did not put up any resistance when facing them. NASA leaders thought that perhaps this was a type of artificial intelligence. Below the sea surface, the tide kept rising. Floodwaters quickly flooded the entire city. All the houses and vehicles were swept away by the raging waves. Sooner or later, everything would turn to dust. Brian and Casey realized something was wrong and quickly ran away. Unexpectedly, when they got there, the water was already flooding. The fastest way to escape the disaster was to run to a higher floor. At this time, the fat Casey was swept away by the huge wave. In the moment of danger, Brian immediately jumped down to save Casey. At the NASA center, the director saw that the situation was not good, so he resigned and fled with his family. Fowler became the director to replace him. With her authority, she went to NASA's secret information storage. After reviewing her old accident tape, the ship was attacked by the same AI as before. The manager also told her that they had hidden all this for a long time, because that technology was hundreds of thousands of times more advanced than Earth's. Fowler urgently contacted the military. It seemed that they wanted to use nuclear weapons to deal with this strange object. Fowler did not want this to happen, so she herself would find a way to stop it. On this side, a helicopter squadron broke into Brian's building. Fowler led Brian and Casey to review the attack on the spaceship. It was an intelligent technological creature. She apologized to Brian after many years of misunderstanding, and asked him to help her save the Earth. Brian did not care about the past, but he asked for one condition, which was to set his son free. Fortunately, they still had a ship in the museum. Now they just had to tow it back, and they could fly. The next morning, the army also escorted the electric bomb too. Now the only hope was that it could destroy the entity. Fowler sent someone to pick up Brian's son. Now Brian could rest assured to be a hero to save the Earth. If they used nuclear weapons to destroy the moon, the radioactive dust and moon debris would bring humanity to the brink of extinction. While assembling the spacecraft, a large earthquake damaged the thruster. So they only had 2 left, which meant the thrust was no longer enough according to the original calculation. Fowler, for everyone's safety, decided to disband, taking all the staff and troops on the plane to the shelter. But then, thanks to Casey's genius calculation, they still decided to fly, but waited for the moon to get closer. That is, with only 2 engines, they can still fly to the moon. Since the crew has all given up, Fowler and Casey will take their place. The fat guy Casey has dreamed of being an astronaut since he was a child. But life has forced him to do many jobs to make a living. Now, Casey can become an astronaut and fly into space. After that, Fowler sent his son to her ex-husband, Doug Davidson. On this side, Brian also hugged his son Sonny after many years. He gave Sonny a gun for self-defense. Sonny drove Fowler's little boy to the shelter to find the General Davidson. At this time, the moon was so close to the Earth that you could easily see the scenery on it. The water was quickly sucked away from the ocean. The gravity was strong enough to create terrifyingly high tsunamis. They did not immediately hit the mainland, but rolled into towering waves, wanting to swallow the spaceship. The spaceship passed by in time. Everyone breathed a sigh of relief. After flying for a while, a thruster was lost. But with his experience, Brian handled the situation well. Unfortunately, the main fuel supply also ran out. While they were worried about not having enough fuel, they discovered that the speed of the ship was constantly increasing, because the gravity of the moon was many times stronger. Thanks to that, they reached the orbit that Casey had calculated. Sonny ran away below, almost being swept away by the flood. Seeing Michelle next to him tattooing his parents' names, Sonny also showed her that he also had a tattoo, but it was wrong. Jimmy contacted his father, General Davidson. He said he would come pick Jimmy up. But before they could finish speaking, a group of thugs stopped and robbed the car. The crew stopped at a fuel station in outer space. While they were refueling, behind them, the moon began to appear and was very close to the Earth. Because there was no ground control center, they had to do everything themselves. Because it was so close to the Earth, Newton's gravity was fully utilized. Small pieces of debris from the moon fell like rain. A meteorite fell, flattening a mountain. The ship now had to face countless flying meteorites. It was very difficult to pass through the layer of debris between the moon and the Earth. At this time, below the Earth, Sonny's group had reached a village, seemingly safe, but the moon appeared. It began to suck everything underground. Sonny promptly led Michelle and Jimmy into the shelter. After a while, the moon also passed. When the 3 of them stepped out, the place was desolate, lifeless. Outside in space, Casey did not forget to take a photo of what he saw. Then, they released the bomb, hoping that the entity would take the bait. Brian returned to the ship to wait for the monster to appear and deal with it. Finally, the entity appeared, swimming around the bomb. But it did not bother to attack the bomb, but attacked the shuttle. Brian had discovered that this thing would scan active electronic devices to attack. It was rushing towards them, intending to destroy all three. In this urgent situation, Brian immediately smashed the bomb's remote control and threw away Casey's phone. So the entity could not scan anything and crawled back into that hole. Casey Dolores said, "Why don't we turn off the power of the phone?" At this time, Fowler revealed that on Earth, the military was preparing to launch nuclear weapons, so they did not have much time to handle everything. Then, they reattached the bomb and used the spacecraft thrusters to enter the hole without activating the equipment on the ship. At the same time, the meteorite flew wildly and destroyed the mothership. The trio went deep into the moon. After 25 kilometers, they finally ran out of shell. Because it was too dark to see the way, Brian was forced to start the ship to turn on the lights. The other entity quickly discovered it, and Brian performed the technique of steering the ship straight in. Inside was a complex superstructure, built to stabilize the moon like a large gyroscope. Thanks to this structure, the moon was balanced. The trio went deep into the core of the superstructure. This system was powered by a white dwarf star. This was a technology that they could not even dream of. They were overwhelmed by the advanced level of the aliens. Brian drove the ship straight to the core of the white star. This would be the moment that decided their life or death. The entity flew in, Brian was ready to drop the bomb on it, and Fowler was going to activate it. But just as he was about to do so, the ship suddenly lost control. Some force had taken control of the ship and steered it into a cellar. The entity would not let go. It used its tentacle-like proboscises to stab the hull. At the critical moment, a beam of light hit the entity's face, helping the ship get in safe. The entity angrily banged on the door. Everyone inside also managed to land, but the strong impact made everyone faint. At this time, below the Earth, Sonny's group had reunited with his mother and uncle. Radio said the moon was getting too close and their oxygen supply was running out. People should find oxygen storage devices to save themselves. Sonny and his uncle went to a store to find oxygen tanks, but as soon as they found them, they encountered the same robbers from the afternoon. Sonny held a gun to the head of the leader of the robbers, threatening them to obediently return the car and oxygen to Sonny. They continued on their way to the shelter. The military had prepared nuclear weapons, ready to fight. Now they were just waiting for orders to proceed. The robber was still following Sonny's group. He was furious and wanted to take back the oxygen tank and avenge the humiliation of being robbed by someone else. Sonny gave the gun to his uncle to deal with the robbers. At this time, more and more moon debris was falling. Sonny had to avoid the debris while controlling the car, so that the robbers could not pass by. A container truck was shot by a meteorite, flying over their heads, and crashed into the robbers' car. The ground began to crack, and was pulled into the air by the moon's gravity. Sonny aimed straight through the crack. One of the robbers' cars hit the rock and exploded. Sonny luckily landed in a nearby forest. Davidson called Sonny to ask about his son's safety, and asked him to bring him to him. At this time, birds in the sky began to fall to their deaths due to lack of oxygen, so they had to carry oxygen tanks to continue their journey. Returning to the spaceship, a blue light swept over the three of them. After waking up, Fowler and Casey could not see Brian anywhere. It's strange that this place has oxygen like Earth. Who is behind this advanced technology? An automatic door opened to welcome the two people inside. Outside, the entity couldn't get in and left. When Brian woke up, this technology entered his mind, in the image of his son. It turned out that the ancestors of mankind had lived in a faraway place. They used artificial intelligence in the form of nanomatter to serve life, but this technology had the ability to learn and perceive itself. It rose up like a swarm and destroyed any threat to their existence. They refused to work for humans because they thought humans were inferior. Just like that, artificial intelligence hunted and killed the entire human race. Luckily, there was still a small group that survived, fleeing to the edge of the galaxy. At that time, they used the uncorrupted ones to build super hard armored planetary structures, powered by the stars, the moon being one of them, searching for planets with enough conditions to incubate and regenerate humanity. But this plan soon failed because the corrupted AIs destroyed it, leaving only the moon in time to escape. Finally, it drifted to Earth's orbit, then planted their genes on Earth to form humans. 15 years ago, when the accident happened at the beginning of the movie, it found the moon and tried to dig into the core, drain the energy of the moon star, causing the moon to deviate from its orbit and crash into Earth. Destroy two targets at once. Another thing was that Brian needed to destroy far from the moon star, so that the moon could safely return to its orbit. Fowler and Casey found Brian. They went to the ship, and surprisingly, the ship had been repaired exactly as it had been when it was new. Not only that, the electric bomb was also upgraded to the highest level. As soon as the door was opened, the monster attacked. Brian accelerated and rushed out. The entity immediately chased after it. Brian lured it away from the core. He flew to the moon's defense artillery ships, using the launcher system to weaken it. The AI entity without any doubts quickly chased after it. It had indeed fallen into Brian's group's trap. But the entity was really hard to destroy. No matter how they shoot, it didn't have much effect. Brian steered the ship to the wormhole. The moon's defense artillery shells chased the entity, but still could not destroy it. Meanwhile, down on Earth, the moon was flying close to the clouds. The elliptical orbit was almost able to launch nuclear missiles to the moon. The military immediately prepared to activate the launch. General Davidson suddenly pulled out the key. He had a hunch that his ex-wife, Fowler, would prevent this disaster from happening. So he pulled out his gun and forced everyone to wait. Outside, the moon flew over the roofs of tall buildings, as if hell was about to fall. Countless pieces of debris from the moon fell, destroying the ground. Sonny's group was still on their way to the shelter. Seeing that his daughter was out of oxygen halfway, Tom gave his little daughter a chance to live. Finally, they arrived in front of the shelter's door. It didn't stop there. Now the real disaster began. A meteorite fell and sent Sonny falling into the abyss. Meanwhile, on the moon, while Brian and Fowler were arguing about who would sacrifice, Casey sneaked behind, locked the latch, and accepted to sacrifice himself to save humanity. The entity had smelled it and immediately crawled to the back of the spacecraft. Fowler painfully pressed the ship's release button. These nano-monsters were gloating, thinking that they had completely defeated humanity. Casey just waited for them to surround the entire ship, then pressed the detonator. A loud explosion, and he died along with the evil AI cloud. It disappeared into smoke. Below the Earth, at this time, the moon swept over the towering mountain peak, causing the snowy mountain to shake and collapse. Luckily, thanks to the force of the explosion, Sonny and Michelle fell right into the shelter. Brian's group was also pushed out of the tunnel, falling to Earth. Coincidentally, the ship also fell right into the snowy mountain below. The moon escaped the AI worm and immediately returned to orbit, returning the beautiful and peaceful Earth to humanity. Brian stepped outside, breathing in the fresh air of this place. In front of them was the roof of the Empire building, also pulled here by gravity. At this moment, they felt that the Earth had never been so livable. The rescue helicopter flew to pick up the heroes who saved the Earth. Sonny's group was walking when they saw their parents' helicopter coming to pick them up. Everyone hugged each other in happiness. Together, they looked towards the rescued moon. Inside the core of the moon, Casey was brought here. The ancestors of humanity transformed into the image of his mother. She told Casey that they had scanned Casey's consciousness. Because he saved the moon, so his consciousness would live forever. The movie ends here. Thank you very much for your support, so that the channel can develop as it is today. If you find it interesting, please give me a like and a comment about this movie. Especially, please subscribe to the channel to follow my movie recap. See you again, my dear friends.